about Jackson's inauguration. Kind of an interesting one because he's an interesting fellow. Well, it was on March 4th of 1829 that Andrew Jackson was inaugurated as the nation's 7th president. March 4th, 1829. Now, backing up a little bit, who's really disgusted with his election? What's that? Well, in general, who? Wealthy. The wealthy people were just disgusted with this guy, you know, that got elected president. They couldn't believe it. Well, who wouldn't be upset? The common person. So everywhere across the United States, common people were jubilant over Jackson's victory because they thought they were going to get a fair shake in government for once, okay? And so when he had his inauguration, the nation's capital was jammed with over 10,000 people at the inauguration. Now that's not a lot of people in today's inauguration, but at that time that was a lot of people that came to a presidential inauguration. The place was just jammed up with over 10,000 visitors to the nation's capital for his inauguration. And in those days, people came from as far away as 500 miles to see him get sworn in. And in those days, 500 miles was a long way. People just didn't travel those kinds of distances. So a couple of firsts for this inauguration is the amount of people that were there, of over 10,000, and the fact that some even traveled up to 500 miles to get there. Well, Jackson did something that was kind of unusual, you probably wouldn't see anymore, is after he was inaugurated in as the 7th president, he had an open house at the White House for anybody that wanted to come. Yeah, anybody who wanted to come could come to this open house. You know what an open house is. You open up your house and you visit and have snacks and who knows what else, depending on the person putting it on. So after his inauguration, Jackson held an open house in the White House. And all of his followers, which were many, many people, including mostly common people, jammed into the executive mansion, which is what they call the White House, and just took it over. Just took the whole thing over. Now, it was quite a sight. There were some what they considered distinguished citizens at the inauguration. Those would be people that maybe weren't so common or maybe were a little bit more of the social gathering. And these are the things they viewed as they watched this open house. Men in muddy boots were climbing on chairs and tables. Men with muddy boots were climbing on chairs and tables. What do you think happened to a lot of the furniture in the White House? It got broken. Okay, furniture was broken in the White House. It was kind of a free-for-all. They had all kinds of food there, and the trays of food were knocked over. There was a huge mess inside the White House. If you go in the White House today to visit, you think you're going to see stuff. I mean, that thing is tidy to the nth degree. I mean, it is not a thing out of place. Well, there was food spilled everywhere. Made a huge mess. And people got in some discussions about politics, didn't agree, so what broke out? Fights, yeah, fights. They're fighting in the White House. So, I mean, here are these distinguished citizens witnessing men in muddy boots standing on the chairs and tables, furniture being broken in the White House, trays of food being knocked around, heck of a mess all over the White House, and then fights were even breaking out in the White House and around the White House grounds. Now, things got so out of hand that Jackson, they had to help him out of the White House and took him to a hotel room so he wouldn't be injured. I don't think anybody was trying to injure him, but it got so crazy in this open house that his protectors, so to speak, aides, helped him out of the White House, took him to a hotel room so he wouldn't be injured. Well, when the wealthy who witnessed it, and maybe the wealthy that heard about it, basically wondered if what had taken over the United States presidential office. What had taken over our country? Huh? Go ahead. Well, what had taken over a negative factor? My God, look at what's happened in the White House. Is it possible that blank could have taken over our country? What do you think blank might be? King Mob. Yeah. So, the wealthy who witnessed this event feared that King Mob had replaced law and order in the United States. What's King Mob? What's a mob? What's the definition of a mob? Ms. Cottrell, look in that fancy-dancy dictionary and find me a good definition of a mob. M-O-B. So wealthy people thought that King Mob had taken over our country.
A large disorderly crowd.
Okay, it's perfect. A large disorderly crowd. So that's a mob. What's a king mob, do you think, in people's mind? About 10 times that? I mean, just a huge problem. So 10 times the disorderly mob, huge and disorderly mob. They called it king mob. It was so big and so bad, not a control. So it was not a real good, positive thing. But it probably summed up how Jackson and the common men were. Okay? That'll take us to the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Let's tell you about what Andrew Jackson did when he was president of the United States. Now, don't you think that these presidential candidates that are running for office right now have a pretty carefully developed political program in mind? So if they're elected president, they're going to have a plan. The thing about Jackson was he had absolutely no carefully developed political program when he assumed the presidency. He had not even thought about it. So he didn't have any particular agenda or particular program, or I'm going to do this if I'm elected president. You know, it wasn't. He wasn't very organized. So President Jackson had no carefully developed political program when he assumed the presidency. But he had 3 firm beliefs when he took office. He had 3 firm beliefs that he's going to base his presidency after. Okay, he had 3 firm beliefs. Number 1, he believed that the government belonged to all of the people who could vote. He believed the government belonged to all of the people that could vote, not just the wealthy. He believed the government belonged to all of the people who could vote. Now, he believed in limited federal government. He believed in limited federal government. Believed in limited federal government. Now, he believed in the United States as a whole, but he believed in limited federal government. And I'll tell you what he really believed in was the power of the presidency. The power of the presidency, which tells you what? He believes he is in charge. Okay? The power of the presidency. So, he believes the government belonged to all the people who could vote. He believed in a limited federal government. And he believed in the power of the presidency. Now, one of the first things, and you heard this yesterday if you watched the Super Bowl much afterwards, the post-Super Bowl. We'll get to that in a minute. He invented what was known as the spoils system of politics. He invented the spoils system of politics. We'll see. What is the spoils system of politics? What is it? That's right. So the spoil, yeah, but see, he's not looking at it. You mean the Henry Clay ripoff? Yeah, he's not looking at that now. He's a whole different philosophy. What he did is he replaced all political opponents in the government that he could with people that were what? Supporters or loyal to him. So the system of government we know as the spoils system of politics is when you replace all political opponents in office with those that are considered supporters. Now, do presidents do that to a point maybe now? They're certainly going to have, when they pick their cabinet, they're going to pick people that are not political enemies, but they may pick people from different parties. I mean, they're a little better than that. But that wasn't the case. What Jackson did when he took office, he replaced anyone that he considered was a political opponent and replaced him with supporters. And so the spoils system came up with the great expression that you heard yesterday if you really spent some time after the Super Bowl. And what's the famous saying every time somebody wins a championship? What do they say? They hand them the trophy, they say, what? To the victors belong the spoils. Anybody see that yesterday after the game? Didn't watch it long enough. My wife was mad at me for how long I watched it. But anyway, to the victor belong the spoils. That's the spoil system. In other words, whoever wins gets to do things as they wish. To the victor belong the spoils. Denver Broncos yesterday, to the victor belong the spoils. What were the spoils? Vince Lombardi trophy, call yourself world champions, the nice ring you're going to get, probably 4 or 5 months from now, the Super Bowl ring. That's the spoils. And to the victor go the spoils. That's where that statement came from, was the spoils system of government that Andrew Jackson invented. Now, what's the problem with the spoils system? It sure encourages loyalty, doesn't it? But what might be the problem? So I get elected president. Well, not so much get enemies, because you're getting closer. Just because you put all of your loyal supporters around you as president, does that mean those people are any good? No. That's the problem with it, is that sometimes the supporters aren't in the best interest of the government, okay? So when you talk about the spoils system, the system encouraged loyalty, but it did not necessarily benefit the government. In many instances, the people that were loyal to Jackson, that were appointed to key positions, were not very experienced. So could they make decisions on what was best for the country? No. Okay? So that's one of the problems with it. Okay? Is that you put people in key positions that aren't very experienced. Now, John Kennedy did that. Does anybody know that story? He used the spoils system when he picked his attorney general when he was elected president. Who did he pick, Nick? He picked his brother. His brother was a lawyer, but his brother had absolutely no political experience and no law experience. If you're the attorney general, you're the guy that advises the president on matters of law. Bobby Kennedy had absolutely no experience as a lawyer. He had earned his degree, but he was not a practicing lawyer. So we'll give you a precursor here, why did John Kennedy pick his brother to be attorney general, despite the fact that he had no experience? You're dang right he would. He would. Your people that you think Andrew Jackson's supporters that he puts in the spoils system are going to tell him if he's wrong? No. John Kennedy knew his brother Robert would always give him an honest answer. Okay? What's another reason he might put him in there? He trusted him. You're darn right, he trusted him. He didn't ever have to worry about his brother trying to gain politically by doing this or that, because he was loyal to his brother. Third reason he picked him is because his father, John Kennedy's father, pressured him to do so, which has nothing to do with anything other than it really does point towards the spoils system. But that happened even in 1960 with John Kennedy. But Kennedy, to back that up, Kennedy had one of the most balanced cabinets in American history. He had several Republicans in his cabinet. Okay, but he did use the spoils system without doubt when he picked his brother as Attorney General. And his brother turned out to be a very effective Attorney General and helped him in many, many crises, including the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, which you'll hear about next year. Well, despite the problems with the spoils system, President Jackson was firm in his belief that the spoils system helped the government. And in reality, it caused him a lot of problems. But he believed it did not. Okay, now that'll take us to our next subtopic, which is a little further explanation maybe of the spoils system, and it's entitled President Jackson's, quote, kitchen cabinet. President Jackson's kitchen cabinet. Okay, now were these people that were members of his normal cabinet? The Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, was Secretary of War? Was his kitchen cabinet those people? No. The kitchen cabinet is something he developed, which were simply people that Jackson surrounded himself with as unofficial advisors. Unofficial advisors. So they were people he trusted that he might ask their opinion of that were not in his official cabinet. So another thing Jackson did, hoping to bring the government and the people closer together, was his creation of the kitchen cabinet. And the kitchen cabinet were people that Jackson surrounded himself with as unofficial advisors. Where to get the name kitchen cabinet, do you think? Anybody want to throw that around? What? Well, it's close. Who gave it the name kitchen cabinet? People that supported Jackson or opposed him? Opposed it, because they claimed that he used to sneak these people in the back door through the kitchen to meet with them so nobody knew they came in, which he actually kind of did. So the term kitchen cabinet came from Jackson's opponents, which meant that these advisors entered the White House by the back door through the kitchen and met with the president in secret. Now, I'll tell you, Jackson wasn't stupid. You know the difference between Richard Nixon and John Kennedy's success? You know what I think? The reason I had a good principalship here, do you know why I think I have people that maybe will write us checks? A lady wrote us a check for $800 a day before we left for the DC trip last year and said, take this money and take the kids out to eat. Who do I have a good relationship with that gives me good public relations that allows me to benefit? What'd you say? What'd you say? Through what? What? Media, the newspapers. And many of these members of Jackson's kitchen cabinet were what? Newspaper editors. Okay? He established a very good relationship, very friendly relationship with the press. Very smart. And because he recognized how smart it would be to be friendly with the press, he actually placed a number of well-known editors in public offices, gave them positions. He had a great relationship with the press. Now, if I call Zach Spade up when he worked here for the Daily News and I said, hey Zach, I need you to come up here, I want to tell you what our DC trip has planned. If Zach likes me and he comes up and I tell him all the things we're doing, is he going to put that in the paper in a positive spin? Sure he is. And people in the community are going to read, God, that's pretty cool. He's taking those kids to DC. And I'm not making this up. Some lady brings me in 8 $100 bills last year and says, take the kids out to eat with these. You know where she knew all about this?
Paper.
Through the paper. So it's very important you have a positive relationship with the press. Going back ahead in history, John Kennedy had a tremendous relationship with the press. He was the first one to do public press conferences where the TV stations came in. Richard Nixon, on the other hand, had a horrible relationship with the press. Horrible. And it really hurt him, not only during his time to try to be president, but during his presidency and afterwards. So Jackson was pretty wise by putting some of these well-known editors in public offices, and some of them even came in and were members of his kitchen cabinet. Very wise. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about some powerful congressmen that are going to represent various parts of the United States, and we're going to see if any of them ring a bell. Okay, because I think they were once called what? They're getting older now. Famous Three. Okay? But anyway, Jackson believed in the power of the presidency, so he believed that only the president could speak to the nation as a whole. Well, we've got some famous congressmen that are representing different areas of the country that some are going to do what with Jackson? Clash, and some are going to probably get along fine. But at this time in American history, we had 3 major regions of the United States, and they're represented by 3 different powerful members of Congress. We've heard of 2, but we've got a new one coming in. Okay? So we'll again go through this. Who represented the northeastern part of the United States even during this time in history? Who was the guy?
John C. Calhoun. Wait, what?
Northeastern part of the United States. From Massachusetts. Daniel Webster. So who did he represent? He represented people like merchants and manufacturers and bankers and property owners. So the person at this time that's going to represent the northeastern part of the United States is going to be Daniel Webster of Massachusetts. And he's going to represent wealthy merchants and manufacturers and bankers and property owners. So you got a guy that has a lot of influence in Congress up in that northeastern part of the United States by the name of Daniel Webster of Massachusetts. Who are the southern planters going to be represented by, Will?
John C. Calhoun.
John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina.
Which is where? South?
South. He's representing the South and the planters. So, what were our other regions? We had, in your notes, what were our other region besides the Northeastern and the South? Where else was it? West. Well, the West is going to have a new guy. Who was the old guy that represented the West? Henry Clay. Well, the new person that's going to represent Western farmers and land speculators is going to be Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. So the powerful congressman that represented various parts of the United States, in the northeastern part is going to be Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, representing the merchants, manufacturers, bankers, and property owners. The south, representing the planters, is going to be John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. And the new man that's going to represent the west, western farmers and land speculators, are going to be represented by Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. Now, we're going to need somebody that's going to have to set in and try to work with these three people and be a compromiser so that they can work with the new President of the United States. And who do you think has the job and given the title of the Great Compromiser? Henry Clay. Very good. So Henry Clay now becomes the Great Compromiser. He's going to try to balance the interests of all three regions of the United States so it can be workable. And he again was from Kentucky. So, powerful congressman that represented various parts of the United States. Northeastern part of the United States, Daniel Webster of Massachusetts. Southern part of the United States, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. And western part of the United States, Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. And Henry Clay of Kentucky tries to balance the interests of all three regions and is given the name the Great Compromiser. Okay, now we'll get into some good stuff. Talk about President Jackson's Indian policy. Now, President Jackson did not have a very positive outlook of Native Americans. And this is going to be the start of where we're going to talk about Native Americans in the United States. And as we go through, we're going to end up getting, after the Civil War, to a really detailed lesson on Native Americans, which is going to lead us to the Bozeman Trail, which is going to lead us to